So I forgot that I found a Jonathan Chait article today. So if you don't listen to Chapo, you may not know who Jonathan Chait is. He's basically a typical highly paid American columnist, a big turd who supported the Iraq War and is one of the dumbest people alive.
Yeah.
So he has some choice takes in here. The headline is, "The Green New Deal is a bad idea, not just a botched rollout." So all the other critiques are like, "Oh yeah, I fundamentally agree with the Green New Deal, but actually, it's just not practical enough." So Chait says here, climate change experts have called for zeroing out emissions in the power sector by 2050. So he actually limits it to just the power sector, not even all emissions, which is pretty interesting. Well, the Green New Deal
Maybe it's because he's really dumb.
He is very dumb. While the Green New Deal proposes doing so by 2030, on what basis does it maintain that the time frame can be accelerated by 2/3? It does not say. If my plan for retirement is to have $1 million in the bank when I'm 70, and then I decide the new plan is to have $1 million when I'm 50, is that, quote, progress or just empty sloganeering?
Cool, man.
Pretty cool shit, huh?
Yeah.
The plan contains too little prescription in areas where it's needed, avoiding any mention of the need to expand nuclear power, increase population density in cities, and cap
So he's basically like going backward several decades in terms of like the best we can do.
Yeah.
And saying, like, it's like, dude, we all fucking know that shit. We're all set on that. We want to do that. But right now what we really need to do is, I don't know, you might phrase it as a Green New Deal.
Yeah, I think that's a fair thing to call it.
Yeah.
I'll circle back to the nuclear power thing later.
Yeah.
We'll get to that. He's also complaining about the thing that all other shit libs are complaining about which is, oh yeah, there's a bunch of non-climate policy in here like universal health care and creating jobs and stuff. So, he quotes another of Chapo's favorites here, Ross Douthat. His dark interpretation of the choice for non-climate stuff is that it feeds conservative suspicions that dire warnings of climate change are merely a ruse, seizing opportunistically on the issue to justify, hashtag full socialism. He actually uses the symbol for sharp there instead of the actual hash sign.
What the fuck?
The seizure of the economy's commanding heights in order to implement the most left-wing possible agenda. So he's saying we need to not have that stuff in there because it'll make conservatives afraid. Which, in my opinion, good. They should be afraid.
Fuck, just leave them all behind. or show them the way. I don't fucking care anymore. Just, make the world better. And if they want to join, they can have it,
A few years ago, Naomi Klein wrote a book laying out the case for why climate change required a revolutionary attack on global capitalism. Yeah, it was good.
Yeah.
I didn't read it, but I heard a bunch of stuff about it, and it sounded good to me.
Sounds good.
Her argument, while deeply flawed and frequently self-contradictory, anticipates the Green New Deal's ideological character. Klein not only disdained the value of using prices to efficiently allocate the cost of greenhouse gas emissions. Maybe he's the guy who wrote that Economist article.
Yeah, right.
She celebrated the defeat of the cap-and-trade bill in Congress as a victory for real climate progress against the sinister forces of neoliberalism. Which she's right about. I think. Cap and trade sucks.
Oh yeah, cap and trade. Yeah. Sorry. For a second I was like, neoliberalism is not good. What I got to turn around.
I'm just trying to figure out if there's anything else in here worth reading.
Well, I mean, Jonathan Chait, nothing's really worth reading.
Right.
But he's out there and we have to defeat him.
Oh, this is a really fucking great thing for him to say here. You may have heard the old joke, we must do something. This is something. Therefore, we must do this. That's what you're doing, dude.
Yeah, exactly. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot other than that. The rest is 3 ways your dog asks for help. And this one thing will properly flush your fucking ventricles or something like that. Just like trash articles.
Wow.
So, yeah, so that was Jonathan Chait. Thanks, John.
Moron. Thanks, John.
So the last thing is from the Trillbillies. They did an episode
Hell yeah.
talking about, among other things, the Green New Deal.
Yep.
So they had some pretty good points, actually. So their points, to extremely summarize, I recommend listening to the episode.
Yeah.
Just one of their better ones, I think.
It's always good.
Everything in it sounds good, but it'll require a fundamental transformation of the entire U.S., and there's a lot of social pressure in the way. And they're specifically talking about like their experiences in rural Kentucky, where like even
coal country,
just a mild, like small tax on one thing, just throws people into a foaming rage. They also say we can't do it and still have capitalism, which I think is a valid critique of the bill because, you know, the bill doesn't say like we're going to have full communism or anything like that.
Right.
Through the political process, this is something we've already said during this episode.
Yeah.
Through the political process, there's going to be lots of compromises to it.
In big quotes.
Which is exactly why you need to make it, quote, unrealistic.
Exactly.
Because it'll be pushed towards, quote, realism.
Yeah. There's literally that fucking saying, you know, shoot for the stars and you'll, land, or shoot for the moon and you'll land among the stars, something like that. Like, that's
my
like
favorite poster that was in my high school.
yeah, that's like old-timey shit. Everybody fucking knows this. Like, if you want something, go way beyond it and then see what happens.
Yeah, it's cool that very serious pundits don't know basic politics.
Yeah. Also, like, what's scary is when you apply that in reverse, like reverse engineer it for reactionaries, you're like, well, what are they asking for? Things like basic slavery and stuff. And you're like, well, what do they really
Universal
want?
basic slavery.
Yeah, universal basic slavery. And you're like, well, if that's what they're asking for, what do they really want? Like, what? Holy fucking shit!
What they're getting?
Yeah, what they're getting and what they really want.
They're getting right
now.
Yeah. Okay. So now we'll go into my analysis and response. I just have a few points because I probably didn't spend as much time as I should have on the notes. But you know, what are you going to complain about?
I'm just here for the ride.
Well, I wasn't addressing you. I was it's the royal you.
Right. The royal y'all.
Yeah, the royal y'all. So the good parts of the bill, I would say, are attempting to go 100% carbon neutral. That's good. Including strict language about marginalized groups, which like I generated a word cloud and then grabbed the like frequency of all the words. Number one, of course, was the United States, appeared 26 times.
USA.
Economic, number 4. And then down in the not super high, but very high frequency, vulnerable and frontline, which is referring to like marginalized groups, mentioned 8 times in the text of a bill that's only 6 pages in a Google Doc. So that's pretty good. Yeah, so they make very explicit mention a lot of marginalized groups. Another thing I really liked is they include, quote, low-tech solutions, which, like, that is a buzzword I never thought I would see in a congressional bill.
Right.
For sure. If you've never seen the blog Low Tech Magazine, go check it out. It's really fucking cool. That was one of the things that, like, completely changed my worldview from being, like, a high-tech zeitgeist movement, like technocrat guy, to being like, maybe primitivism isn't the dumbest idea ever. I don't think we should, stop having insulin, but
right.
Maybe being in an agrarian society wouldn't be so bad.
Right. Yeah.
And the low tech solutions that they're talking about are basically implying like restoration agriculture, which is really good shit. Another very good book, Restoration Agriculture by Mark Shepard, which I've been wanting to do an episode on for a long time, but I just haven't gotten to it yet. And the last good thing is no stupid bullshit about taxes.
Right.
Which like I'm surprised in all the responses that I looked at, none of them mentioned that, because like that's what most of the shit libs on Twitter were talking about, was like, oh wow, we're just gonna accept MMT as real now, are we? Like,
you're like, yeah,
yes,
because it's the best.
It's called chartalism.
Yeah, because it's correct.
Yeah, like if you look at literally any aspect of reality that includes how money is created, you know, modern reality or historical reality or historical political economic theory, that it all supports MMT.
Yeah.
MMT just adds like, oh yeah, now we have central banks.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's the only difference, really.
It's slightly less controversial than Copernicus's theory that the Earth revolves around the sun. And they're like, no, the sun revolves around the Earth. We know this because the sun goes up and down. And they're like, you need to maybe like take some measurements.
Yeah. And then you'll find that the Earth is flat, actually, too.
Yep. Super flat.
So I would say the bad parts of it are one, that it's non-binding,
Right,
which
as we
one
said.
of those articles already mentioned. Two, it's only a 10-year plan.
As opposed to like an infinite plan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or
It
at
needs to
least,
be a
at
forever
least a
plan.
30-year plan. I think it should at least be a 30-year plan.
Yeah.
Because
3,000-year
I
plan.
mean, the emissions part, yes, aim for 2030.
Sure.
But
yeah.
then say like
just for fun.
all of the rest of the shit, 30 years, because and if it's binding, then if we don't reduce emissions by 100% by 2030, we're still on the hook for it. Mm-hmm. That's
Yeah,
the thing that we want.
that's also
And
true.
there's still gonna be all those fucking jobs, which we want.
Yeah.
At least until we have full communism.
Right. Exactly.
And then the last thing is it seems to keep a lot of the implementation public or private rather than public. So like a lot of the stuff is like let me scroll up real quick. Yeah, making public investments in the research and development of new clean and renewable energy technologies and industries, directing investments to spur economic development. And so like to me, investment means that they're going to take public money and put it into private organizations to do that stuff, which I personally think that they should create government bodies with public oversight and some sort of democratic control and just do stuff instead of like, I mean, you can contract some stuff out, I guess, but like, yeah, it shouldn't just be like, oh, we're going to invest in stuff. Like, put out RFPs for stuff.
Right. Exactly.
Hire workers, make the workers do things,
Right.
train them to do things, and all that kind of shit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, so on the subject of nuclear, okay, this policy is being criticized by shitlibs for both not being internationalist enough, not being politically expedient enough, not being financially responsible enough, and not mentioning nuclear energy enough. So, if you haven't like realized the contradiction there, the last point undermines the other three because nuclear energy is not internationalist.
Right.
Just look at Iran trying to have nuclear reactors. It's not politically expedient because there's major public pressure against nuclear power, and that comes from like the environmental movement. So it's not just like think tanks. It's like actual people that don't want nuclear.
Yep.
And not financially responsible because nuclear requires massive subsidies both to commission and to decommission the reactors. Because like, here's the thing with nuclear reactors, like they have a service lifespan, and then when you get to the end of it, the company that runs it is like, oops, we ran out of money to shut down the reactor.
Yeah.
Help, I guess. Anyway, bye.
Yeah. Speaks to private property once again.
Yeah, and just like completely disingenuous things. Like their real thing, I think, is they just want to be the very serious person. Right. And nuclear is a very serious technology.
Yeah.
So they want that, and then they also don't want to give up the infinite growth aspect.
Oh yeah, God,
that we have.
Yeah.
I think that's the real impetus behind saying that we need to have nuclear, which is nuclear has a very high energy return on energy invested, which is like the ratio of energy that you get out per unit of energy that you put in.
Yep.
And solar and wind, like wind has it's like 14, well, it's a dimensionless number. It's like 14 units of energy per unit of energy that you put in. Solar is only like 5. Nuclear is like 50 or something like that.
Yeah, it's like
gasoline, of course, is like 500.
Insanity.
It's like it's a crazy amount. But of course, that measurement doesn't account for like the amount of solar energy that went into producing
Right.
all that shit.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the amount of like gravitational energy that went into like putting all the pressure on this stuff to turn it into oil. But anyway, I would say the biggest obstacle to the Green New Deal is that U.S. geopolitics and political economy is intimately tied together with oil.
Yep.
So there's some stuff that people may not think of. Like, of course, our transportation infrastructure is based on private automobiles. That's a huge obstacle.
Right. People love their fucking cars.
Yeah. But the bill does mention trains, possibly multiple times. I don't remember.
Yeah.
But other like less obvious things, U.S. military superiority is 100% dependent on oil. We don't have a large standing army. So the primary asset of the U.S. military is its Air Force, which will not work at all without kerosene, which you need oil for. Our weapon exports, which is a huge export industry in the U.S., is funded by Saudi oil sales. Our supremacy in global trade is thanks to the Bretton Woods Agreement that forces industrialized countries to do business with the U.S. in order to get dollars that they need to buy oil.
Yep.
Do you think I should explain that in more detail?
Google the Bretton Woods Agreement. There we go.
Well, like also like how that works. Like basically, like since other countries can't issue U.S. dollars,
right?
This is MMT stuff that I'm getting to. Since other countries can't issue U.S. dollars, and there's a treaty. I think it's a treaty requiring all oil sales to be conducted in U.S. dollars.
Agreement.
Yeah, agreement.
Quotes, yeah. Lots of kinds of agreements, but this is just an agreement.
Right.
Yeah.
And so the way that you get U.S. dollars, if you're a country that can't issue them, is to trade with the U.S. And that means trading with U.S. businesses, so importing stuff from the U.S. So that you can, exporting stuff to the U.S. so that you can get dollars, and then that you could spend them on oil. So that really helps with U.S. trade supremacy. Another thing, imports to the U.S. are dependent on fossil fuels to increase the speed and power of cargo ships and to ignore ocean currents.
Yep.
Because that's one thing with like colonial era trade versus industrial era trade is during the colonial era, trade took a very long time.
Right.
Because they all had sailing ships.
Exactly.
So you need to follow the wind.
It was winds. Yeah.
Exactly. And then there are 10 million oil and gas jobs in the U.S., and most of the people in that industry are death cultists.
Yeah.
As our friend Soyboy would affirm.
Yeah, basically. They have no care or idea. Yeah.
Another thing I would say is, although the bill mentions low-tech solutions with respect to agriculture, it does the opposite with transportation, specifically mentioning a high-speed rail. So it's not clear what that's referring to because in the U.S., high-speed rail is kind of an ambiguous term. So, like, when most people think of high-speed rail, they think of, like, Japanese bullet trains.
Right.
But I just found this out today. Rail speeds were actually way in excess of 100 miles an hour in the 1930s. But after a train crash that killed 45 people happened in 1945, I think. Congress limited the speed of trains to 79 miles per hour in 1946 under pressure from the automobile, highway, and trucking industries.
Of course.
Which, I'm sure there was no conflict of interest there.
Right.
They were just
like,
looking
45
for
people
safety.
died. Yeah. And how many automobile deaths have happened since that year? Oh, I don't know. Thousands, maybe millions.
Yeah. Well, we actually have the number right here.
Oh, we have the numbers right here.
From 2000 to 2009, there were 300,000
holy fucking shit
fatalities from driving in a passenger. From driving or being a passenger in a car or truck.
9 years.
Yeah.
300,000 fatalities.
Yeah. That's like a crazy. That
is that's a lot.
How many 9/11s is that?
People. I was just going to say, well, that's 100.
1,500?
That's 100 9/11s, as I recall. And I really want to just like get into the numbers here.
So just to compare real quick, passenger on urban mass transit rail, 33 fatalities. Passenger on commuter rail and Amtrak, 70 fatalities. And so the rate per billion passenger miles, motorcycles, which is, of course, the most dangerous, 212 fatalities per billion passenger miles. For cars, 7.28. For trains, commuter rail, 0.43, and for urban mass transit, 0.24. So, like, trains are infinitely safer than cars.
Yeah.
Did you calculate the 9/11s ratio?
Oh, no, I didn't have to. But I looked up the Bosnian genocide.
Okay.
Which took place over roughly 4 or 5 days, I suppose. And they lost 8,372 people in roughly a week, which is awful. It's awful. Yeah. But in 9 years, we lost 1/3 people to quote-unquote accidents.
Yeah.
Which, to me, is just industrial negligence.
Yeah.
Combined with, like, chance.
Yeah, I mean, the automobile transportation system is a horrific atrocity, I think.
Fucking ridiculous.
And if there's anyone alive that's responsible for creating that system, they should be thrown into Darvaza gas crater.
Yeah. I think. Exactly. Yeah, there was somebody that I knew, this girl Rachel, that I knew from rural Michigan, and several years ago,
Rachel Carson.
No. She and her mother were driving down just like a random country road, and there was a like a hit and run that spun their car out, and Rachel like got just like fucking like demolished basically, and just bled out right there, and her mother just had to watch her fucking die. And you're like, that's in America, that's normal.
Yeah.
Right? Like in most other countries, if not all other countries, like that's an atrocity.
Yeah.
And here that's just part of life and death, and that's just part of the cycle.
I have a friend who died in a street racing accident.
Yeah.
Which,
we
like,
know
that's
people who
literally
died
impossible
in
to do
accidents.
on a train.
Yeah. And in the past, you know, it was like, maybe somebody, like one person got trampled by a horse. Maybe one person fell out of their fucking vehicle.
Yeah.
You know, and now it's 1/3 every decade.
Yeah.
Which is honestly fucking barbaric.
Here's another thing that will interest the kiddos that are listening to our podcast. One of the great things about trains is you can be really fucking drunk on them and not die.
Yeah, you're not driving that shit. You can do whatever the fuck you want.
Even if the operator is drunk, you probably still won't die.
Right. You can eat in one car. You can fuck in the bathroom. You know, you can sit there reading the whole fucking time.
Yeah.
You can have conversation with like 100 different people.
I think, like, since I graduated high school, probably upwards of 80% of the books that I've read have been on a train.
That's fantastic.
And I live in the suburbs.
Yeah.
So I never, ever take the train.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, another like a problem with like true high-speed rail, like the bullet trains, is that it's very expensive compared to ordinary rail, which like I highly support regular low-speed trains, or even just like, you know, those 1930s era trains. That'd be fine with me. Even for Japan's world-class high-speed rail system, which, by the way, 0 fatalities in 50 years.
Yeah.
0.
That's a lot better than 1/3 in 9 or 10 years.
Yes.
Yeah.
And even 70 in 9 years.
Yeah.
So in Japan, the cheapest rail pass is 59,000 yen for a 21-day pass. So that's if you can pay a lot of money up front.
Yeah.
Then you get that pass.
Yeah.
And
then you're just set.
If you're poor, you probably have to
safe.
get like a day pass or a 7-day pass.
Right.
And so the average annual income in Japan is about 5 million yen. So that would make the cost of transportation there 20% of the average income. But on the other hand, Americans already pay 20% of their income for transportation, which that's based on $11,403 per year out of $59,000 annual income. So maybe not so bad.
Yeah.
But imagine if we did regular rail and didn't pay 20% of our income to transportation. How amazing would that be?
God. Or like if, I don't know, we just made the high-speed rail standard.
Yeah.
And just subsidized that with, I don't know, whatever the fuck else we felt like.
The money that
it's
the government
all variable and we can do all of it.
Yeah.
We could just choose to do it.
Another thing that was interesting was like when I was trying to find the cost of high-speed rail in Japan, Most of the articles that I found were about how high-speed rail is great and we should do it because it tackled the problem of real estate prices. So like housing costs in Japan are like relatively low because you can live like 3 cities over from where you work.
Yeah.
And then commute on the high-speed rail.
Yep.
Which like
you can commute 3 cities over and you can drink any fucking where.
But that sounds like it sucks. So like
well,
why don't you just have rent control instead, you assholes?
Yeah.
Okay, so now we come to the anime section.
Dun dun dun.
Because it's very related.
Dun dun.
So today we're talking about 2 of the greatest anime works of all time. Princess Mononoke and Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind.
Yes.
So if you somehow have not seen Princess Mononoke, it's a movie by Hayao Miyazaki about a man who gets a lethal curse from a forest spirit and tries to cure it, getting in the middle of a conflict between an ancient forest lord and an industrial village run by the Japanese version of white feminists.
Pretty much, yeah.
So one of the first things I noticed, I've watched this movie a million times, but
Same.
I didn't notice this before. One thing I thought was really interesting is that the main character is actually from an extinct Honshu ethnic group called the Emishi. So according to the history that Miyazaki is using, the Emishi were the indigenous people of Honshu, like the original inhabitants of Japan.
Yep. And
they were wiped out by the Yamato, which is the current dominant ethnic group in Japan.
Yep.
By the 8th century. I'm not going to say CE. That's stupid. So, Ashitaka is his name, right?
Yep, Ashitaka.
Yeah. Ashitaka's village is one of the last surviving Emishi settlements, and the movie takes place in the 16th century. So, they're really holding out there.
Yeah, exactly. They're just like on the ass end of the rope there.
Yeah.
Like, we're the last fucking ones.
Yeah, that famous part of the rope, the ass end.
The ass end of the rope. Yeah. Well, and it was like there was a really key moment where, this movie is at the very beginning. It's about basically the extinction of the Emishi.
Yeah.
Because the Emishi were people who knew how to live with the environment.
Yes.
Right. And Miyazaki was kind of like recognizing like, oh, the Yamato, which is like his people, right? The Japanese people as we understand it. They wiped out the indigenous tribes and clans, including the Emishi.
And the Ainu.
Exactly. Which were like
the other
potentially
theory,
related.
The other theory with the Emishi is that they're actually not distinct from the Ainu, but Miyazaki is treating them as being actually distinct.
Right,
group.
they kind of get their own thing.
Yeah.
And so the beginning of the movie with Ashitaka really highlights that because of the curse of the conflict between nature and quote unquote Civ, where the Emishi were comfortable living in the balance, right? Then Civ corrupted nature, made it rage and want to destroy Civ. Then Ashitaka had to kind of be the like the medium or the intermediary between those two forces. And so when he left his village, because he was like this prince, he like cut his top knot.
Yeah, he's Prince Mononoke.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. And kind of seriously, but he cut his top knot before he left, which was kind of a symbol of like he relinquished his nobility.
Oh, I missed that part. Okay.
Yeah. And so he was doing that, and everybody was like gasping and like, "Oh my fucking god!" Because he was kind of the last.
The last royal, basically.
The last royal of their group. And so like once he left, they had no kind of like civilizational dignity left. They were just kind of like a band, right, as opposed to like a society. Yeah. And so then he left to do his thing, and he knew what he was doing. He was like, this is it. Right, like this. I mean,
he was going to die.
Exactly.
Otherwise.
This wound, this curse signifies our extinction, and so I have to leave, and I have to do what I have to do. But like, you guys are going to have to figure out your own story.
Yeah.
Right? So then he leaves, and he goes west, which is sort of southwest in Japan.
Oh, and one more thing about leaving his village. There's, I don't know if they. I was like 3/4 paying attention to the movie this time, but there was actually like a girl that looked like was going to be the person he was going to marry that was in the village, and
and she ran up to him, exactly, as he was leaving.
She did give him something, I think, to remember her. Oh, his his knife.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep. His
It was
knife.
an obsidian knife.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so it was like, and knives are interesting, especially in these contexts, because knives are tools and weapons,
Yeah.
right?
And it's sort of it was like halfway between a knife and a sword.
Yeah, exactly.
Which, like, I wonder if that could symbolize like him losing his virginity or whatever.
Right.
Kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's got lots to do with lots of different aspects of like human existence, especially when you're looking at like male characters,
Yeah.
you know, with fucking blades and shit, because, you know, it's just classic
Swords are
symbolism.
penises.
Right. Swords are penises, and like, you know, doorways are
Ties are
vaginas,
also
and-
penises.
Right. Right. If you fall into quicksand, that's a vagina. You know? Okay, sure, why not?
I never
guess.
thought of that one.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, I've had some weird dates. Yeah. But
Were they in quicksand?
no, but they just wanted to talk about how like everything that's shaped like a loop is a vagina, and you're like, look, I get the feminist critique, but like, come on, you know, like is my cup?
Oh, so my shoelaces are a vagina
right,
now.
right. My shoe, you know, my cup, you know, they're like Sauron's eye is vagina. I was like, that's fucking
If you wear
ridiculous.
Velcro shoes, that means you're gay.
Right? Yeah.
You're afraid to have pussies on your shoes.
Right. You can't have
Means
it.
you're gay,
Can't
dude.
do it.
Dude, you're wearing slip-ons? That's gay, man.
Or is it? But yeah.
Flip-flops, on the other hand, not gay.
No, that's something else entirely. Yeah, so he, you know, Ashitaka like cuts off his top knot, you know, abandons his people in a way, but it's because they understand the kind of human nature, sort of civilization nature balance,
Yeah.
and how it needs to be maintained and understood, and so that's kind of what brings him into the West. And again, the Southwest.
In a way, it's kind of a
in Japanese
self-sacrifice
geography.
for him
Absolutely.
to preserve his village.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
exactly. He's leaving because they have to be saved.
Yeah.
And he knows that by leaving, he diminishes their status and their power, especially given like what they've been through as like they're just hanging on. You know?
Yeah.
They're like the Yamato are just like hammering on them. And,
Yeah, nobody
and-
knows they exist in the story.
Yeah.
Because
yeah.
they're
just out
the stuff
there.
of legends.
Exactly.
Like, is it Jiro, I think is his name?
Yep.
He like literally says like, oh
He's like, I
wow,
thought you
just
guys
like
were
the
all
ancient
gone.
stories.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're still around. It's like, well, kind of not anymore. You
Yeah.
know, because some fucking boar with a bullet in his side
Yeah.
ran up and cursed me.
Yeah.
Like shit.
Oh, and
So,
one more thing about like their connection to nature is, and the extinction thing is, Ashitaka rides a red deer.
Yep.
Which is an ancient Japanese deer that's
Yep.
now extinct.
Yep.
So
Yeah. No, that's a great.
it's a
that's
fictionalized
great
version
note.
of it, but still.
Exactly. Yeah. It's one of those things where it's like, you know, they're part of, you know, very deep history.
Yeah.
And
by the way, Yakul kicks ass, dude.
right? Holy shit.
What a great mount. Like, yeah, he's so fucking agile.
Yeah, just like, let me
rules.
help you out, buddy. And
Yeah.
like just like does crazy shit. Yeah. So this story is like, it's interesting how the story begins with basically what you would consider an extinction event. You
Yeah.
know? Where they're like, oh yeah, I mean that's all we can do. That's it.
Yeah.
That's it for us.
Oh, and the pacing is very fast as well. Like it jumps
It's just
right
like
into the
bam,
story.
Bam, bam,
yeah.
bam. Yeah. So Ashitaka like runs off southwest from where they're living and surviving, and I mean he's it for what they at that time consider to be kind of like the core of their, I guess, identity.
Yeah.
You know, like they would have to basically reformat their entire society to survive at that point.
Yeah.
Because he's gone now.
Yeah.
And he's cursed, and there's
The feudal
nothing
system
left.
has no more legitimacy.
Exactly. Yeah. And
Yeah.
and that's a good way to put it. So yeah. After that.
So I just have like some random points on here.
Yeah. So he runs into this ironworks.
Yeah.
Yep.
So like the major antagonist is this ironworks. It's like a industrial village basically. And so one thing that I noticed was like a political economy aspect is the Eboshi, the woman who's in charge of the ironworks village,
Yep.
says a lot of people want our iron, and she includes the samurai,
Which is the Yamato encroachers.
the collective
sort
warrior
of-
class of Japan.
Yep.
And the wolf princess. But she's supplying someone. Like they're not just making it for themselves; they are making
Right.
like weapons for themselves. But
Yeah.
they're exporting a ton of iron. So like, I was wondering like who else would be using large amounts of iron in guns in the 16th century, since the Meiji Restoration wasn't until the late 19th century. So like, Japanese government wasn't using guns. The warrior class wasn't using guns. There were some battles where they had riflemen, but they were pretty few and far between, I think.
Right. So this is where like history gets interesting, because in Japan and in Europe, right, like by the 16th century, both of these regions were using gunpowder weapons, just not as their primary mode of combat or whatever you might call it.
Yeah.
So I added a comment here where I say, if I recall correctly, gunpowder use was already becoming a thing in Imperial Japan, and it was definitely backing up. It was definitely being used to its fullest possible extent by the time of the Sengoku Jidai, which is the Warring States period of Japan, where, you know, there was all these different clans fighting, and then finally Nobunaga won, and then it turned into eventually the Tokugawa period. So,
Yeah, I think the anti-Nobunaga forces used gunpowder weapons.
Yeah, everybody basically was using it as if they could.
Yeah, and then there's one battle where there was like a significant use of riflemen, and it kind of devastated the opposing side.
Yeah,
I think they were trying to do cavalry charges, and they got basically fucked by.
Yeah, I can't remember if that was Sekigahara, which is like the bloodiest per capita battle in history, or if it was something else. Yeah, Sekigahara was astounding. Like, if you just read up, Sekigahara has its own fucking Wikipedia article, just like a lot of, like, you know, it's like Bloody Angle or Gettysburg.
Yeah.
But it's like Gettysburg with fucking samurai, where they're like cutting each other's stomachs open and shit.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, Jesus Christ. You know, like, oh my God. You know.
Yeah, it's been a while since I played Samurai Warriors, so I'm not familiar with my Sengoku history.
It's astounding.
But we probably mentioned it incidentally in the first episode of season 3, the Sengoku episode.
We probably mentioned it once.
Yeah,
I'm guessing.
So check that one out if you haven't listened to it already.
Yeah. So Sekigahara was significant. So as far as like gunpowder in this era of Japan, the sort of 15th through 16th century, the Kurosawa film Kagemusha, which translate roughly to Shadow Warrior or like Body Double, demonstrates the battlefield of use
Shadow clone.
Yeah, basically, right? Yeah. You're like, demonstrates the battlefield use of muskets bought from or via the Portuguese, because there was a regional trade that the Europeans had begun inserting themselves into, which is kind of how they ended up there, because they knew that like Japan and China and these other areas of Asia wanted to trade. They had demands, they had interests, but they didn't want to break their kind of autarky or their like border security or whatever the fuck they had at the time.
Eboshi does mention Chinese guns because she says they're too heavy, and that's why they're making their own. Yeah. So they definitely were importing some Chinese guns, at least in the context of the movie.
They had exposure to it. They knew what it was like. Yeah. And so the European traders, mostly Portuguese at that time, I think, maybe some Dutch, maybe a few English, were then also potentially trading in guns and gunpowder and similar technology with the Japanese. But Japanese feudal regimes were always concerned with self-containment, autarky, and having total control over their lands, their islands. And so it would make sense, both in this context of this story, but also just historically, that they would prefer like a domestic source for things like gunpowder and really anything else that was rare or dangerous, because it was, you know, if they had domestic control over it, then they could have more power over it, and therefore more power to deploy against their rivals and stuff, you know. So yeah, that was just a little aside.
So I just looked this up because I remembered reading it. I thought this was pretty interesting on the subject of the guns. The guns that are used in the movie are called Ishibiya, which translates to stone fire arrow. Nice. It's basically old Japanese for hand cannon.
Nice.
And it says firearms were first introduced to Japan by the Portuguese in 1543.
Aha!
So a little bit after they were colonizing the New World, or the Americas, rather.
Right.
And there are some speculations that hand cannons were imported from China before 1543, so possibly not from the Portuguese. I'm going to go with that theory because white people are stupid.
Right.
But yeah, I'm thinking that maybe in the movie she's like possibly, since it's not going to the emperor and it's not going to obviously the wolf princess.
Right.
Maybe they're exporting to China. Maybe they're exporting to the Portuguese.
Right.
But either way, they're supplying a ton of iron to a lot of people. And it's supposed to be high quality iron. That's like one of the things in the
right.
So in this settlement they have, which is like kind of on the side of a mountain, they've basically like wiped out the forest on their side of the mountain.
Yeah.
Not only to get iron-rich sand that's under the forest, but also because like older ironworking techniques require huge amounts of charcoal. It says in the movie they run the forge for like, they run it in 4-day shifts or something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
So they need huge amounts of charcoal to power the bellows.
Yeah.
So they fight off these creatures that are attempting to reforest the land. The creatures are called shoujo, and they're actually part of Chinese folklore. They're supposedly creatures with red fur that love to drink and are likely based off orangutans.
It's very likely. Orangutans are very like people. They're lazy and they love to drink.
Yeah.
So
in the movie, though, they look more like gorillas, so not quite the same.
Yeah. And they talk in slow motion.
Yeah.
Just like Republicans.
Irontown, the settlement, has gender equality.
Which is great.
No scarcity.
Which is also great.
Although the one thing I noticed is like the gender equality is almost just like an inversion of hierarchy. So like the women kind of treat the men like shit.
Well, I was gonna say, it's like you said, it's like, an iron town run by white feminists.
Yeah,
They're just like,
exactly.
Instead of men being in charge, we're in charge.
Yeah,
we
they
just
overperform
treat everybody else like
masculinity.
shit. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We just adopted toxic masculinity instead of overthrowing it.
And I mean, there's some other like positive things about it. Like I think they were implying that a lot of the women that were there were like sex workers before.
Yeah,
there, which is like
it's all
good and
great,
bad, because it's like, I mean, we don't want to demonize sex work, but also like you didn't want to be in a Japanese brothel in the 16th century. I don't think it seems like it would be bad.
Seems a bad idea.
Since a lot of those people were sold into slavery, often by their parents.
Yeah, typically they came from peasant class.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And
no power over their destiny.
Yeah, and the women mentioned like, we actually can like eat our fill instead of being like constantly starving.
Yeah.
They also take in a bunch of lepers. So like, obviously we don't have leprosy as a major issue now, but back then there were leper colonies where like they were just kept completely separate from society and basically starved of resources and contact with civilization. But in Irontown, she has them like somewhat separate because they still have a contagious disease, but they're part of society and they are actually the blacksmiths.
You're cool, you're chill.
Yeah,
we'll feed you, it's fine.
So they're the ones that are making the Shibuya.
Yep.
And so on the other side is San, who is the only human on that side. She fights for the forest, which all non-human life depends on, and that's symbolized by the fact that she was raised by wolves and is the wolf princess.
Yeah, and she was one of those kind of classic fairy tale, like I was abandoned in the woods and the wolves took care of me, because wolves are wolves. They're interesting like that.
Yeah, I think her parents were actually killed by a forest lord.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I couldn't remember if that was
the case.
I
think they say like she was from a village that was destroying the forest or something like that, and so her parents were killed, but they spared San.
Okay.
I don't have a whole lot of other stuff other than there's like a ton of magical realism in it, like magic as in like Shinto magic, including the forest lords obviously, and Kodama, which are like a famous Japanese spirit, which I think it's really funny that when you see the Kodama running away,
they're like winning.
They have little asses.
Yeah, right. Little
so
butt
cute.
cheeks. They go little spirits with butt cheeks.
Yeah. I also think it's funny that the main ironworks building looks like one of the corporate headquarters pyramids from Blade Runner.
Right. And my one little note is that it's a gross oversimplification on my part, but large pyramidal structures seem to be common indicators of civilization or hierarchy, and so I think that it was kind of a visual signal that this outpost Ironforge village was still very, very clearly a symbol of the incursion of civilization.
Yeah.
It was no, it's not just any old village sitting out in the middle of nowhere. This is a fucking thing.
It's a proto-state.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I think if Eboshi had her way, she would have been a full state and probably taken. Well, she said she wanted to rule the world. Actually,
yeah, exactly.
So,
she was all about that.
Yeah,
yeah.
If they made this into a live action American movie, they would probably have Brie Larson play her or something like
that. Exactly.
Or fucking Gal Gadot.
Right. And you'd be like, hell yeah, and they'd be like, oh shit, actually no, yeah, we don't want any of that.
Who would they cast as San?
Dude, I mean, these days, fuck, I don't know.
What's her name from Broad City or something like that?
Yeah, right. Somebody young and
Jenny
extremely fit. Yeah, because she would have to be
extremely fit.
Because she's Anne Prim and a survivalist
true.
And a wolf. She's basically a wolf with a human body.
She is the most badass fighter in the movie,
she would
I think.
be extremely savage.
Yeah.
So somebody very athletic-ish. And
you know what? They would probably just go with ScarJo.
Story. Yeah. Possibly.
Yeah. Or the wolf girl from Glow. Have you watched
that? I mean, that would be hilarious.
She's basically
and
already
appropriate. Yeah.
She's not as pretty as San, but
Yeah. I would expect more muscularity, get her to do some benches or something.
Yeah, do some squats.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, overall, 10 out of 10 movie, I would say.
Absolutely. Yeah, and there's lots more to dissect. We just covered the basics of it.
Yeah.
If you haven't seen it, watch it and digest it and then watch it again.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's a great movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the other one that we're going to talk about is Nausicaa, which I have less on this because I started watching it this morning and I didn't have time to finish it. So
yeah.
Hopefully you have some stuff, but the plot summary, I guess. So industrial civilization collapses. 1,000 years afterward, there's a toxic swamp called the Sea of Decay taking over the planet and destroying the remains of civilization and the people still cowering in them.
Yep.
All the trees on Earth have been replaced with mega-scale fungi, symbolizing the decay taking place. And the dominant species is an insect about as big as a ferry boat called a Om or Omu. Which fortunately we know this won't happen since all the insects are going to be extinct in 80 years.
Right. Hooray.
Which is really good, actually.
Yeah.
I think it's great.
So good.
So Nausicaa, she is the main character. She lives in the Valley of the Wind, which is an agrarian village safe from the Sea of Decay. So one of the few remaining states in the world, Tolmekia, invades and enslaves the Valley of the Wind and goes on basically a revanchist mission to burn the Sea of Decay and return humans to their rightful place of dominance.
Yep.
So I didn't get through the rest of the movie, and I've actually only seen it 3 times maybe, so I don't remember it super well.
So I just watched it, rewatched this movie a couple days ago, and it was great. I mean,
it's also Miyazaki's first movie, I think.
Yeah,
made in 1984.
Yeah, so I read. It's apparently it's Miyazaki's first movie, and it's actually pre-Studio Ghibli.
Yeah,
and so it's technically not a Studio Ghibli movie, but it's a Miyazaki movie.
Yeah,
but it kind of shows what the guy's made of.
Yeah,
right off the bat.
It has all his usual signatures in it.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So
motherfucker loves female main characters.
I was just gonna say the whole strong female character.
Yeah.
But strong female character who isn't just a battle axe all the time. He's got those in some stories.
Not a boy in drag, basically.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And not a fucking
he's surprisingly
psycho.
good at making female characters for a man.
Yeah.
I would say if you're a man and you're trying to write female characters, he is your role model.
He's the fucking mentor.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's see. I mean, there's a lot to cover with Nausicaa. Like, it's really, really great. I mean, I kind of want to watch it all over again myself right now.
Yeah.
Like
I always use a screen from that as the banner for my site.
Yeah.
Like if you look at the top of
the
our
agrarian
website,
villages and everything. Exactly.
neighborsciencepodcast.com.
Yeah. When I first saw that,
it's
I was
the Valley
like,
of the Wind.
Yeah. When I first, like, when you showed me the site for the podcast before I even was part of this podcast, I was like, oh, that's from Nausicaa.
Yeah.
You know, like, oh, cool. You know, so this guy knows his shit. You know, but yeah. So this is another story about the imbalance between nature and like human civilization.
Yes.
But this is a like far-flung post-apocalyptic story where it's not like
it's long after Princess Mononoke happened.
Exactly. Like lots of stories in the post-apocalyptic genre are like 10, 20, maybe 50, maybe 100 years after.
Yeah.
Right after the big turn. This is 1,000 years after industrial society is alleged to have collapsed.
Yep.
What's interesting is that they still have certain what we would call industrial things, such as...
it's very steampunky.
Yeah, it's very steampunk. There's like jet engines.
Yeah.
Like
and this was when
jets.
steampunk was cool and not for nerds.
Exactly. So they've got like, gliders and other shit powered by like mini jets, but they also have these
like steam powered guns and stuff.
Yeah, steam powered guns and like raggedy preserved bomber
super fortress bombers.
Exactly, super fortresses and stuff. But then they also have like really old school windmills and canals and orchards and shit.
Which, by the way, windmills were not replaced by powered mills until like 1940.
Oh yeah,
windmills and water mills. Like that's how efficient they are.
Yeah, they're just like super useful. You know.
Yeah.
Like what the fuck else?
Like we should go back to those.
Yeah. Oh, I agree.
Yeah.
And so like you see that in this world, and what was really interesting is that Nausicaa, this princess of this like little kingdom, which is like, and the kingdom is probably like several hundred people, honestly.
Yeah.
Based on what you're seeing in the animation. But when she's exploring like the Sea of Decay, which is this like toxic jungle and stuff, like she's running around like looking for samples and stuff and all this kind of stuff because she's like she's a nerd, she's a scientist, she's an adventurer,
she's an ecologist.
Yeah, she's an ecologist basically, and in the very like second or third scene, she notices something and she's like running through the jungle to find it, and she like bounces onto one of these giant bugs, which like to us in our world are like disgusting and horrifying, right? This is one of the interesting things about the movie is like you start off and you're like, oh fuck, like what a world they live in. What an awful
Everything's
thing.
a giant swamp.
Yeah, it's a giant swamp.
Giant
There's all
mushrooms
these
and shit.
Giant mushrooms, giant bugs.
Giant bugs,
Everything's horrifying, everything's gross.
Yeah.
It's really scary in a way.
Yeah.
And you're like, ugh.
Like we're all afraid to even like touch an insect.
Yeah, exactly.
Even like the dry ones, like beetles and stuff.
Yeah. And she kind of just like she's like running off of some old plant and she just bounces off this bug. And then she turns and she apologizes to the bug as she's running, like, oh, sorry.
Yeah.
You know, as if it's just like an old friend.
Like a guy walking down the street.
Yeah, exactly. And I was like, that's really interesting. Like that's an indicator of like how she feels about the living things.
Yeah.
You know, and then that's like a theme in the story.
She's read Bookshin.
Yeah, exactly. She is the Bookshin of the future. And then like this story in particular, which is one of the things that contrasts with Mononoke, Nausicaa and San are very different, even though they have many of the same values. Right? Nausicaa lives in this like far-flung sort of like post-nuclear, post-pollution future where it's just spores, like toxic spores and bugs and weird shit. And human beings are just hanging on. And she's like adventuring and she's joyful and she's curious and she believes in human society in a way, in like a limited way. But she's also really into the balance, right? In Princess Mononoke, like San is raised by wolves. She fucking like hates humans. She says
She's
that
on
at least
Team Forest.
Exactly. She's on Team Forest. She hates humans. She says that at least once or twice.
Yeah.
She wants them to die.
Yep.
Even though she is biologically one of them.
True primitivist.
Yeah, she's a true primitivist. Right. She's not an ecologist.
Zerzan.
Yeah. She's not an ecologist. She's not a researcher. She's not a nerd. She is a fucking survivalist, and she drinks blood.
Yeah.
Like she
literally drinks blood.
Literally will. She will fuck you up. Right.
That's actually the first time you see her. She's drinking blood.
Yeah. She's basically slurping the blood out of her mother or her sister.
Poison. I think it's supposed to be poison blood.
Yeah. To take it out.
Yeah.
And then she's like,
and she turns around
blood.
and spits it. Yeah.
And you're like, okay, so you're like deep in with the earth.
Yeah.
Right. But they. And she doesn't believe in a balance. She believes in nature conquering humans. Yeah. Right? Which is really interesting.
Not totally wrong.
Right, yeah, not totally wrong. Like I'm kind of into that, but I'm not an Anprim. Yeah. And so like Nausicaa,
but we should still have insulin.
Exactly. Nausicaa would create insulin for you.
Yes.
If she could. San would be like, fuck you. Yeah. But what's interesting is that Mononoke, Princess of Mononoke, which is kind of this metaphorical title for San, which is like the princess of, the princess of critters, basically.
It's like Mononoke is sort of, I think it's a term that's really hard to translate.
It's really hard to translate.
It means like sort of spirits, but also like nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's just too hard to translate.
It's a tough one, yeah. It's very tough.
We'll never comprehend it fully.
Yeah. These inscrutable terms. Yeah. So San is this kind of princess of the forest, if you will. Versus Nausicaa is this princess of human beings, like surviving human beings. But she's the one who represents somebody who seeks balance. And somebody who doesn't want to kill.
Right.
And somebody who doesn't want conflict. Whereas San is like a forest supremacist. Yeah. Basically.
And by the way, they're both Disney princesses.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Actually, they're the only Disney princesses in my mind. And so San is a forest supremacist. And in her story, Eboshi is a civ supremacist.
Yes.
Right. But like a sort of white feminist, if you will.
She's very open about wanting to destroy nature. And
her agenda is very clear.
Yeah.
And systematic.
Yes.
Which is like, nature is just resources, basically.
Right.
So it's like proto-capitalist in a way, or like imperialist.
And the Tolmekians, I think, as well, are trying to dominate everything.
Like, fuck it, like, humans should be supreme like they used to be.
Yeah.
And this is, again...
They're already fighting a war against some other civilization. I don't know if they have that in the movie, but I was looking at the wiki while I was like watching the movie, and there's like a manga version
for
of
listeners,
the story.
We're back on Nausicaa.
Yeah.
So Tolmekians, that is a state of some kind in the Nausicaa world.
They're the revanchist guys.
Exactly. Yeah. They are, and
revanchist gals.
Right, exactly. Yeah. They're ruled by another princess who is like the opposite of Nausicaa.
Yeah. They do have an emperor, but he's never seen in the anime.
Yeah. Their princess is really the operative.
There's one panel of him in the manga.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and she's got like huge armor, and like she actually looks
huge
cans under the huge armor, and she basically looks like if Nausicaa was wearing a bunch of armor, actually. Mm-hmm. And so I found that very interesting, where visually they're very similar, except for their costume. So in that movie, in that world, Nausicaa is looking for kind of a balance, and she's looking for empathy and peace, and not necessarily cooperation, but like mutual respect.
Yeah, like one of the first scenes is what is the guy's name? Lord
Yupa.
Yupa? Yeah, so he's being chased by one of the Omu.
Right.
And so instead of attacking it or whatever, Nausicaa stuns it, and then uses this like insect charm to calm it down and like send it on its way.
Yeah, it's like a whistle that she uses, and it's a frequency that they like, and it's soothed, and and it just goes away. Yeah.
And then another part is like in like a flashback to her childhood. She was actually like playing with a baby Ohm.
Yep.
And the villagers had to be like, we're not having that fucking thing here.
Right. Because to them it was a marauder, it was an encroacher. Yeah. And that was a hugely formative memory for her as a character, like where she's like, oh, I just wanted to be friends with these creatures who we consider menacing traditionally, but it's not hurting me right now.
Yeah.
Right. And you see that she's actually willing to undergo some level of harm and eventually a great deal of harm in order to maintain a balance between living organisms.
Yeah.
And that's a huge part of the story. Whereas the representatives of these two other states, which are at war with each other and that are trying to use her civilization as kind of a proxy, they're all willing to throw anyone under the bus, including their own people.
I mean,
they're
they
just
literally like roll
sacrificing
into the Valley of the Wind and enslave everyone.
Yeah, they're just enslaving everybody. They're destroying everything. They're letting horrible invasive species into the environment intentionally just to undermine them.
Yeah, and they
just,
want to burn
just
the
for like
whole
a small
Sea
bit of leverage.
down.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and then they're like trying to resurrect an ancient weapon in order to like defeat other living things. Right.
So, the Baba character, the old lady of the village, mentions that many people have tried to burn down the Sea of Decay before, and what happens is
it just
huge, massive swarms of ohm just cover the earth and destroy everyone. So
exactly, because they like react to the violence, and they freak out and they just destroy everything.
And on the subject of the ancient weapon, I wasn't totally clear on it, but it seems like in the history of the story, the thing that actually destroyed civilization was those weapons rampaging.
Yes.
So I think that's kind of a holdover of the post-Great War. Which is war is going to be the thing that creates the downfall of civilization.
Right.
But at the same time, as we find out in the story, the reason that the Sea of Decay is toxic is actually because of the sands, the soil, and the water is heavily polluted. And Nausicaa actually has a greenhouse where she has a lot of the plants, or a lot of the fungi rather, from the Sea of Decay, and they're completely harmless.
And she actually has this really great line in like the middle of the movie where she's explaining all this to, I think, Lord Yupa, and he's like, wait, so you figured this out? Like, it's like he kind of knew from his travels or something. And she's like, yeah, it's just that like there's like deep wells underground and everything else that's clean. And we can water things and everything like that. And he's like, oh shit. So you figured this out. Okay, that's cool. All on your own? Like, does anybody else know about this? And she's like, no, it's just me, but I'm kind of like, I'm depressed. I'm despairing and all this kind of stuff. And then she has this random line as they're talking where she's like, it's almost as if like the earth itself is not poison, but like somebody in the past poisoned the entire earth. And she's like, but that's ridiculous. Who the hell would do that? And I was like, God damn it. And it's like, this movie came out in the mid 80s, right? This movie is 1 year older than I am. Right. And this guy was already like, so the earth, we're poisoning and killing it. You know? Like, so,
and it was only what, 5 years after Silent Spring?
I think
was that 79.
So yeah. So it's like, oh shit,
I wonder if it was even translated into Japanese at that point.
Well, probably in some form, or some version or some excerpt. Excuse me.
I mean, I'm sure Rachel Carson wasn't the first person to think like,
well,
maybe
sure,
polluting everything is bad.
right.
Maybe we shouldn't Agent Orange everything.
Exactly. So, what else? There was. So another thing that was interesting about the ancient weapon, what are they called? The giant warrior, or whatever they called it, was that
I don't remember.
The ancient weapon, which they then tried to resurrect, as I mentioned, was an interesting combination of, it was like a biomech. It was like when they tried to resurrect it in the time of Nausicaa, toward the end of the movie, they kind of fucked up because they didn't know what they were doing. They were just like, well, we got one, and we can we can restart it.
Flip the on switch.
Just flip the on switch and see what happens. And it was like literally like it was like fresh born and like already melting because they had no technology to like upkeep it or something.
I see.
So you saw that it was like, oh, it was like basically a giant flesh Evangelion.
Oh, okay.
Right? And you're like, this is terrifying and disgusting. You're
Yeah.
like really horrified, like body horror level horrified. And then, but then when like they got it to attack the attacking Ohm at the very end, it had this weird like laser beam that would cause a nuclear explosion on contact.
Oh, okay.
And so it was like a bionuclear Evangelion multiple combination weapon.
So that also brings in the whole post-war Japanese fear of nuclear attack.
Exactly. You got the nuclear attack. You've got
because the other thing was
biotech.
they said that those machines wiped out like all of civilization in like 6 days,
more
or
or less. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And there was like only
Exactly
a few
like
hangers
nukes
on.
would.
Yep.
So that must have been the real thing. Was like it was a metaphor for nuclear conflict.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so, especially in 1984.
Yeah.
Yeah. You just like, okay, yeah. So they're like nukes are scary and bad, and they shouldn't exist.
Yep.
But in this kind of anime way, they're like, what if it was like a giant walking thing?
Yeah.
With a humanoid sort of feature.
Wow, extreme leftists excluding nuclear power from the future of the Green New Deal.
Right.
Jeez.
Right. What if we created nuclear power? What? Yeah. So it was interesting because there was a kind of a subtle sort of subtextual critique of just weapons technology.
Yeah.
Where it's like, oh, like biotech with nuclear capacities, and like, you know, even these greedy motherfuckers who don't even understand the technology they're trying to use in the far future will try to fucking use it against nature itself because they're just scared and angry.
Yeah.
Which is kind of, it reminds me, like there were some parallels between that and Mononoke, where there was like obviously there's the gunpowder side of the warfare, but also the Ohm and the Ohm in Nausicaa and the boars in Mononoke do similar things. They they swarm, they freak out, but the boars are mammalian. They can't be soothed. Yeah. Right? They just keep going.
But also they're intelligent enough to talk.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so they've got this other balance.
Yep.
Where they're cognitive, they can communicate, they can say things about like, this is the narrative, this is the problem.
Yeah.
But then if you get them pissed, like
they're pig-headed.
Exactly. The Ohm can be like, oh, hypnotize and soothe and be like, we're cool, it's fine.
Yeah.
But the boar are like, actually, we're going to go suicide on you.
Yeah.
You're going to blow us up as much as you want, but we'll literally, like, thousands of us will die and we'll cover the fucking field.
Yeah.
And that's like, 2/3 through that movie, there's people being dragged out from under the boar carcasses, which, by the way, ties back to a lot of what influenced Kurosawa, right? The other great Japanese filmmaker, because he, a big part of the influence on him and his filmmaking, and then like his realism and his like kind of objective eye on violence and everything, was that he was a kid during the World War II, like the bombings of Tokyo and everything.
Okay.
And his older brother would take him and say, look, and like force him to look and observe like the carnage and the death and the burning and the wreckage and everything. And so he had an extremely like photographically realistic understanding of what death and destruction look like. And so when Kurosawa made films after that, he basically put his
nightmares onto paper.
he knew how to make it look,
Yeah.
And so I think that Miyazaki was also feeding on a kind of strain like that, where he's like in the war.
I think he was
scenes. And,
I think he was like aware when the war was happening.
Yeah,
he's pretty old.
He's pretty old. And so so in his animations, there was a sense of realism, where it's like people are being buried under things, people are being brutalized by things, in a way that is extremely carnal, and concrete and very like real. Yeah. But at the same time, like that kind of encourages like empathy and pity, as opposed to just like like spite and contempt. Yeah. Which I think is really important in Miyazaki's work, is like he's very, very invested in empathy and caring, And obviously ecology goes with that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I mean the heroes of his movies. I'm trying to think of all of them. They almost never overcome the main conflict by like killing the other person or like beating them in a battle or anything like that.
They don't just like punch a hole in whatever the fuck the problem is.
Yeah.
They
it's always like
try to understand it.
Yeah, they
like,
figure out what they want and then like try and like either fulfill their interests in a way that helps everyone or like in Spirited Away, I think he basically like tricks Yubaba into letting her go free. Yeah. But it's not like she beats up an old lady.
Yeah, there's no like yeah. Which I like. And like that's something like, you know, just to continuously plug my own writing, like that's something that I really try to learn from. Yeah. You know, because I'm a Western writer, if you will, but with a lot of Asian influences and like Miyazaki, like Princess Mononoke was hugely influential for me. And Nausicaa to some extent, but like Mononoke really. And so, you know, moving forward with my own creative work, I've just been like, wow, like that's a really fresh and good, wholesome, like even though it's violent, it's wholesome way to look at conflict and like understand problems and how we can move beyond them. You know?
Princess Mononoke is kind of an exception, but all of his other movies are like family friendly movies. Yeah.
When I looked up Mononoke earlier for like some like review material just to like check it out, and like I added some links into our notes here for people to just kind of glance at. I found various perspectives on it, but I also found like a bunch of different links in the first page results that were just like, you know, is Princess Mononoke family friendly? Is it child friendly? Yeah. And it was like a bunch of people who were saying like, unlike his other movies, it's kind of not that child friendly because it's a lot darker. It's a lot more intense. It's kind of scary.
The first time I watched it, I think I was like 13.
Yeah.
And I rented it from Blockbuster.
Right.
And
you're like, oh, shit. Yeah.
That scene early in the movie where he like fires the arrow that decapitates a guy, that like disturbed me so much.
Holy shit.
I don't think I'd ever seen a decapitation on screen before. And I was just like, what the fuck am I watching?
I
think my mom was there too and was like at the same
what?
time as me like, what the fuck are you watching?
I thought this was a fairy tale, and you're like, well, we're gonna see. Yeah. And I mean, that was like expressive of like the rage that he was cursed with, right? Like the rage that equipped him with the power to do a terrible thing to a human being, right?
And as far as decapitations go, not that bad, really.
Not that bad. I mean, like the guy was just gone in an instant. Yeah.
You got anything else?
I don't know. I mean, like if you guys like the Green New Deal or what it represents, you should probably watch those two movies, Nausicaa and Princess Mononoke. And just check it out. Like compare, contrast. Just enjoy what it's about. Like understand.
Like I think The Valley of the Wind is a pretty good idealization of what society might look like. In an ecological
we might have
future.
more tech, we might have less tech, but it's like a great model. Like they do.
But rest assured, there will be a giant swamp trying to kill everyone.
Right, exactly. Within like 3 years.
It might not be dominated by insects necessarily. More likely invisible bacteria that just kill you without you even knowing.
Yeah, exactly. They're just going to sneak right in.
So Green New Deal, good. Miyazaki, good.
Yep.
Full communism, good.
Awesome.
Jonathan Chait, bad.
Noah
terrible. Smith, bad.
Yeah. Pathetic. Mediocre.
Non-binding resolutions, bad. So if you enjoyed that, check out our other episodes. We have extensive show notes for this, including the full text of the Green New Deal.
Lots and lots.
In a much easier to read format than what is available online. So I'll link that in the show description. As I mentioned before, our website is neighborsciencepodcast.com. I am at Handle of Rye on Twitter. Kris is at solidarity_goth. Our Twitter account, because of character limits, is at neighborscipod, but at everything else, it's Neighbor Science. We have Facebook, Instagram, Patreon. I think that's it. I have a Twitch stream that I have been streaming on infrequently. It's Twitch TV/DrunkyDLuffy. I've been using it to watch anime, although Last one, I tried to watch the new season of Mob Psycho 100, and I got through one episode, and then Crunchyroll started having problems. So I played the new Subnautica instead.
Nice.
Yeah, so check that out if you ever see me online. And what's your book information? What's your book stuff information?
My series?
Yeah.
Okay, so I've been working on this fantasy series for a long time, and I self-published the book 1 out of 6 in the series in 3 parts. But the series is called The Dream of the White Stag. It's on Amazon. My first name is Christopher, Kristofer. Last name is Nivens, Nivens. So if you Google any of those things in combination, you should probably be able to bring it up. I'm also trying to start a Patreon at some point to serialize the remainder of the series, and to add some world building fun.
Yep.
Some various fragments and some mystery. So if anybody's into world building fantasy, dark fantasy, epic fantasy, political fantasy, that's what I do.
Yep. I can help you set that up soon.
Yeah, thanks,
man.
man.
I've already done it once.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah, so that's it, I guess. Bye.
Bye.